Millennials are some of the most misunderstood people of our time. We're seen as lazy and entitled snowflakes that just want everything handed to us. But when the facts are all laid out, this simply isn't the case. See, the reality is we've grown up in the midst of major mass media and technological advances unlike any other generation before us. And with this podcast, I'm going to spend time talking to other millennials that break this stereotype down with a smile on their face. So I have a question for you. Are you ready to join me on this adventure? What do you say, you dang millennials? How's it going, Lane Anderson? How are you, buddy?
I am good. How about you, James?
I am pretty good. So I wanted to have you as my very first podcast guest because you're a longtime friend, former bandmate, former around the campfire cigar smoking friend. Good times back in the day. So I wanted to have Lane specifically on the podcast for the first episode because I think he has an interesting perspective on life. I think he has an interesting perspective from his podcast, Conscious Mess, which we will make sure we have in show notes for all of you guys to see. But just wanted to talk to you, Lane, a little bit about yourself. If you could just tell me some about you and about Conscious Mess and what the podcast is about. And if you could just sum it up in like 2 sentences, you could just explain your whole podcast in 2 sentences. That'd be great.
Well, my name is Lane. And is that good enough?
Yep, that's great.
I cut it down in 1. I figured that would be a little better.
Awesome, great. That's great, man.
In all seriousness,
into podcast right there.
Yeah.
Cut.
My name is Lane. I'm a database engineer, so I work with in technology. I'm married. I have 2 beautiful kids that I love enjoying and being a dad with. And then I am now a host on a podcast that I started over this last summer, and kind of talking about some interesting concepts around consciousness and psychedelics and meditation, and also around topics as well as meditation. I kind of had a weird experience on psychedelics that kind of changed my life, and we'll probably get into that here deeper.
Oh yeah, but, we will. We will get into it. And I love your podcast. It truly is interesting. And I saw it, I think probably the day that you made the page or the day that it was at least public on Facebook. I was like, oh, I know this is going to be so good. So I think you started out just around this, your first episode starts around this idea of ego death, which I guess isn't necessarily an idea as much as an experience. So can you explain a little bit about, just maybe for those that have never heard of ego death? I'd never heard of it until I listened to your first podcast, and then I went down this incredible YouTube black hole that is ego death. But tell me a little bit about that, because I think is that fair to say that's probably the start of, I guess, what pushed you to doing our Conscious Mess?
Definitely, I would say that was definitely the beginning. So I honestly didn't know what ego death was until I experienced it. And what ego death is like, so I had to experience when I used psychedelics. I was kind of in this depressed state of mind, and a really negative person, just really sad, and didn't really realize why I was sad to even begin with. Just didn't self-analyze myself much, and didn't really know my current state of mind. But so I used a large dose of psychedelics, and I had this thing where people call ego death.
By psychedelics, what do you mean? I want to interrupt you. What do you mean by psychedelics? Is this mushrooms? Is this what? I don't know. Something that's some sort of I don't know, artificial chemical. I don't know. That shows you my experience with it. What is it?
So psychedelics would be more categorized towards mushrooms and LSD and DMT.
Yeah.
But there's one side of psychedelics that there are some people kind of pushing for this idea, but there's also some people that would kind of not believe it's possible. But I believe cannabis is a psychedelic.
I can see it.
And I didn't even believe that until I experienced a high dose of that. And it wasn't synthetic or anything like that. It was literally just cannabis bud.
Yeah.
That I had. And so I smoked a lot of it, and because I was kind of just like having fun all the time, kind of drinking, smoking
Yeah.
weed daily to kind of like escape.
Yeah.
But
Which
I
is
smoked
so common. So common. I know so many people that are that way. We have mutual friends that are that way, that it's just anything to escape, anything to get away from just life, how it is.
Yeah, exactly. It's something to numb like whatever feelings you have that could be like depression, for instance,
Yeah.
which is a huge thing right now.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But so I smoked like a bunch of weed, and I had this experience, and I wouldn't say it was pleasant anyway. It was kind of like very crazy, where like I had a lot of anxiety built up, and I could see how it could be like really fear-inducing. But there was like this moment where I kind of just gave in and surrendered to the feeling that I had during it. And after this, I had this, I would say that I wasn't focusing on my body at all, or like the physical world.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
it was kind of like in the moment, I actually felt like I was like connecting to like this, to like God, like to like, it's really hard to describe, but like this feeling of love and joy and like just understanding that everything's okay.
Yeah, totally.
And in this moment of like surrendering, I let go of who I was, because during this like really anxiety filled moment, I literally came to the conclusion that I was gonna die.
Whoa.
And I came to the conclusion
Whoa.
that I was actually gonna die.
Wow.
Like it's kind of weird to say, but like imagine you are like on your deathbed and you're gonna die, and you have to come to that conclusion that you're gonna die, and accept it. I was literally had so much anxiety built up that I thought I was going to, and like my heart was beating like racing. But so I just gave into it, and the moment I did that, I let go of everything of who I was, and I felt like I like forgave myself for all these things I had held on to the past that I didn't realize were even issues to begin with.
Yeah, yeah.
And that all of my like negativity and depression was all just self-built, and none of this even mattered to begin with.
Yeah.
And after this, so like the reason why it's called ego death is like there's this idea that we have egos. And what ego is just this identity of who we think we are and who people think we are in society.
Which is wildly inflated in most people.
Greatly. Yes, I would agree. So like in this moment, like I let go of this and kind of went into this this focus that there's more to life outside of who I am.
Yeah.
And once I reached that, and after I came back from it, it changed my life completely. My depression was instantly gone. I felt so grateful for my life, and I started noticing all these amazing things that were around me that I wasn't even paying attention to begin with.
Yeah.
And it's sad because I had a son at the time, and it makes me really sad to think that I was in that state, even with being married and having a kid. But
Yeah.
after that, I took every opportunity I had to fix all issues that I've created, like conflict, being even just like being mean or like hateful in any way, and just try to pick up the pieces of what I had created and fix it in any way possible and create like a positive experience from it. So I just took the initiative and just try to fixing my life in every way possible. But that's what I would say what ego death would be, is just like losing the idea of myself and understanding that there's more out there than just who I am.
Yeah.
If any of that makes sense at all.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think it's something that as I hear you talk about it, I and not that I've actually never experienced with anything, have any experience with anything psychedelics. The most experience I have is just alcohol, and like a cigar or like tobacco. And so I hear what you're saying, and like there's elements of things that you, and this is what's interesting when I first listened to your podcast. There's elements of what you're saying that I hear, and I'm like, dude, I get it. I get it. Like there's something about that inward examination and something that just clicks, that you go, wait a minute, I'm missing something. And I think for me, maybe there was a time where And I don't know. And this is kind of one of the things I wanted to ask you about. Do you know if this is something that can be achieved like outside of the use of psychedelics? Because like I know for us, there was a really traumatic experience that happened in our life. And I don't know if there wasn't like this up above the clouds kind of experience for me, but there was an experience in my life with losing my son that just shifted. And I mean, you were we were hanging out at that time because I was in living in Boise, and it just like shifted everything. Like everything. Well, I guess maybe it's just the idea that myself, like I became so wildly unimportant that it shifted. But I don't know, and I guess I kind of wanted to ask you to dig in. Do you think it's something that can be achieved outside of psychedelics? Do you think? I know you pulled in kind of in your podcast a little bit of a religious piece to it. Do you think there's any sort of like religious elements to it as well that can be achieved through? I'm just curious, and I don't know, your thoughts on it.
Definitely. I 100% believe that this can be accomplished soberly through different means.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised from what you just mentioned with the loss of your son causing that. I've heard experiences from people who have near-death experiences who come back with like a new outlook on life.
Yeah. Whoa.
And I think it has to comes down to just a moment of surrender, of just giving in that there are things that are more important than the self.
Yeah.
And so I know a lot of people who've had ego death experiences from just doing things like meditation or like even having going to a therapist. So
yeah,
I don't think it's just related to psychedelics. I think psychedelics can bring that out of you easier.
Maybe like slow you down enough, or like get you out of your head enough, maybe that you can have that thought. Like I guess I kind of wanted to dig into. Is it more of like an experience, like an event, or is it something that can happen like I guess over time? I don't know. I know I'm digging in. I'm just.
No, dude.
Yeah.
I love these type of questions. So what do you mean digging in? Like digging in from or over time, like using psychedelics, or just okay?
Yeah. Well, I guess is it something that is like at least I know in your experience it seems like it was this one-time experience, one-time event that happened, whereas in mine I think it was maybe like a process of grieving that maybe got me to, and I don't know if I could claim ego death for me, but at least I hear some of the elements and they seem to relate to my story and where I am right now.
Mm-hmm. I would say I don't think ego death has to be like so dramatic. I think you can like what I guess what you meant, like incrementally like lose pieces of yourself or like learn to let things go of yourself and become egoless. I think that's the craziest part about psychedelics is that it just pulls you into a huge experience where you can just have your whole reality just shattered in front of you within like a span of a couple hours.
Yeah.
I think that's the craziest thing about it.
It makes me so nervous because I've never ever and it just even just hearing people talk about it, I don't think I'll ever experience it. I don't think I really ever want to. I hear it and the stories are so fascinating to me because it's just so vibrant and there's so much to it. I think I guess I can go ahead and give a little bit of my backstory to me since this is my first podcast episode. I work at a church. I'm a kids pastor, and so I'm in a non-denom Christian church. I come with that perspective in mind, and so I think that probably colors some of the things. Can you give a little bit about, I guess, history of your background, if you feel comfortable sharing, just, I guess, where you come from with religion, kind of how ego death maybe fits into that? I know you and I have had many a conversation about religion and just life. So there's context behind this conversation as opposed to me just asking like, hey, give me but for whatever you feel comfortable sharing about, can you talk about, I guess, your concept of religion, how you grew up, and how that impacted ego death? If you feel comfortable sharing,
man. So I grew up like, I would say I wasn't really super religious, but I grew up in a very religious, wanting to be religious family. So, my family was always like, my mom was very focused on like morality mainly, and like being like consciously aware of making positive choices in our lives. I grew up like LDS, and so I had kind of like a belief system built up around the religion itself, but at the same time, I wasn't living my life
Mm.
in the way that that religion wanted. So like
Yeah.
I didn't go to church or anything after I turned 18. But in the back of my head, I still had a belief around it.
Yeah.
And so when I had this like, ego death experience, in that moment of surrender where I felt like a lot of like love and joy and just like appreciation,
Yeah.
I had originally believed that it was God like forgiving me for all these things that I had
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah. And mainly it's just because like it was just really strange to be in that position because I don't think I've ever felt that much like love
Mm.
and gratitude and like understanding that everything's okay,
Yeah.
like no matter what's even going on.
Yeah.
But after this, I had no idea what this even was or what the hell this. Like I didn't even know people had experience like this on psychedelics at all.
Yeah. I
And so
believe it. It sounds
was
like
like-
it was like a giant shift, especially because you had experience with weed before this, right? Like this wasn't your first
Yes.
experience, so yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, dude, like I was smoking weed quite a bit, and I had nothing like this at all. And one of the hardest parts was like trying to convince my wife that something crazy like this even happened.
Yeah.
I remember after this happened, like my wife came home, and then she was like, what's going on?" And I'm like, "I can't talk what's going on right now." And the next day, I had like described this stuff to
Yeah.
her, and the whole time I'm like, she's just gonna think I'm f***ing crazy. She's literally
Yeah.
gonna think I'm crazy because like, how would even me before this would thought anyone who would talk about this kind of thing is crazy? Like they just like fried their brain or
Yeah.
something's wrong with their like the chemical balance in their
Yeah,
body
or just like the
something.
typical like stereotype of people that smoke or use marijuana in any way. That's like the typical stuff you would hear people say. It's all love,
Yeah.
man. Or just whatever people would
Yeah.
say, about just
Yeah.
like your typical 70s hipster or whatever.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
crazy that how much like those things are stereotypes, but like
yeah.
it's one of those things that you don't really understand till like you kind of experience it, and it changed my whole perspective on that whole
Mm.
like movement and everything too. Um, but like over time, I analyzed myself like crazy. I'm like, okay, am I going crazy? Like, am I literally if I'm insane, I want to like find medical help because
Yeah,
I don't want
yeah.
I'm a rational person and I
Yeah.
want to do like what's best for me or like for
Mhm.
my family.
Yeah,
for me.
totally. For your kids, for your wife. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I started like doing a lot of research around like things like this happening and kind of reflecting back on what happened. And what I ended up realizing that like this feeling that I interpreted as like God forgiving me, what I realized in the end it was I went through the process of forgiving myself for all these things within some time span that I couldn't even fathom.
Yeah.
Like it could have been like 10 minutes in the physical world, but I was
Yeah.
just experiencing this and kind of like the weirdest part was when I was in this, I was getting visuals of everything I had done, like pretty much living like what people say they die, like they a near death experience that
Yeah,
they
yeah.
relive everything that happened.
Yeah, you hear
It was
crazy,
it was-
crazy stories from lots and lots of people on those.
yeah, and that was like exactly what happened. Is like within like a couple minutes, I went through what felt like years of going through everything that happened to me,
Yeah.
and then just kind of
Wow.
letting go of them.
Yeah.
And after that happened, I was like, okay, I am first off, I guess what I'd say is I was ever since that moment, I was the happiest I ever was. I had like I felt like everything was off my shoulders. I was not afraid. I literally felt like I could die and I'd be perfectly content with my life. Like
Yeah.
I would literally just give my life to help anyone out because
Yeah.
I was just so happy to even be alive. Because yeah.
Yeah.
And so after that, I kind of looked back on my belief system of religion because a lot of this stuff people related to like spirituality and like religious
yeah.
context. And so I started doing a lot of like research around the history of like the LDS Church
Yeah.
and realized a lot of it's bullshit. And
It's a crazy history, dude.
yeah, it's insane.
It's a crazy history. And yeah, and I mean, you have family that's LDS. I have family that's LDS. I've dug in. There's some interesting stuff. I mean, there's interesting stuff about all religions and all sorts of things, but yeah, there's
not
some
even
crazy.
just that, but a lot of this stuff was like pulled from just regular Christianity
Yeah.
and like copied.
Yeah.
Um, Pretty much like a cult where they just like take belief systems that are pre-existing and put their own little spin on it.
Yeah.
And so I went through this moment. It was really hard for me
Mm.
because what I had interpreted it normally as like a very religious experience,
Yeah.
and I like went through and researched, and I created this notepad of like all the things that were like wrong about the religion I like, grew up in. And I remember I did for like a month straight. Every free moment I had, like during lunch, while I was in the bathroom, while I got home, I was just doing research and getting as many viewpoints from both sides as possible.
Yeah.
And I remember very specifically, there's this one night where I went through it and I was like, okay, you know what? I am so sick of not being able to come to a conclusion if I believe this or not. And I went through
Mm.
every single thing I'd written of why I think the religion was BS.
Yeah.
And I read every single thing. I went, you know what? There is no way I can believe something where there's so many things that I feel are disproven.
Yeah.
So I am not going to believe this from now on. And
Yeah.
from that moment, I have never believed it and
Yeah.
jumped out of it. And I feel completely free after that moment.
Yeah.
So
Was that before, or I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm missing my timeline. Is that before or after this ego death moment?
that was like a month and a half after.
Oh wow. Okay. I didn't
Yeah.
realize that was something you were holding to. We've had lots of conversations about it. I didn't realize that you were holding to some of those things still. I mean,
Yeah.
to a certain point, when you have something that you've grown up hearing about and you've been taught in, it just those things are going to stick, I guess.
Yeah, that's why I would categorize it as a belief system because
Yeah.
I even didn't know how much I believed in it.
Mm.
Why I would call it a belief system is because a lot of the belief is built subconsciously. So
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't realize that a lot of my actions day to day were based off of a religious idea.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I didn't even know it until I had to like analyze
Man.
myself what I did believe.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. So I want to switch gears. I want to kind of talk through. I've been listening to your episodes. I'm on your second episode right now. On your third episode right now. Finished your second episode, and I loved it because you started talking about, and obviously all this through the lens of ego death and this concept of, I don't know, would bettering yourself be a fair way of saying it? I don't know. Maybe not
Yeah,
bettering it. Maybe like simplifying yourself. Is
yeah,
simplifying yourself kind of the way to think? I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. That's kind of how I read it. But you talk about this idea of entertainment overload. You mentioned this issue between people, the amount of and the people and the amount of entertainment that we consume. Can you just, I guess, talk a little bit about like what is entertainment overload? How does this impact us? This is a podcast specifically by a millennial talking to another millennial, and we just consume so much entertainment. I listen to the podcast, all the podcasts that I can. You know, I'm watching TV shows. I'm not as much on TV shows as, you know, they got to catch my attention. But explain to me a little bit, what is entertainment overload? How does that impact, I guess, a millennial specifically, or just anyone?
Okay, yeah. To go back to your first question,
I'm
around
surprised
like
you
this.
remembered it. I'm
No,
surprised you
I
remembered
can pick
it. So
these
good
things
for you, dude.
up. I think that's a great way of putting it, is like a simplified, simplifying yourself.
Hmm.
The way I'd put it is like just self-analyzing and self-reflection.
Yeah.
It becomes like this point, I'd say, where you become your own therapist, where you start dealing with your own issues and like refining yourself. So in a way, I'd say simplifying. I think that's a great way of
Okay.
putting it.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's just, it's something I've thought about as I've listened to your podcast and just thought through it, thinking like, man, I feel like I hear some of the things you're saying and I feel like I'm there maybe? Like I've kind of, I don't know. But anyways, okay, so entertainment overload. What is it?
Okay.
What does it look like for millennials, for those that would not consider themselves millennials, for all them boomers out there? What is entertainment
Well,
overload?
Can't forget Gen Z, man.
Gen Z, they don't matter. That's all right. They don't matter.
Well,
They're not
you're
in
gonna
this.
you're gonna get canceled.
We love Gen Z. That's all right.
We love you.
We love Gen Z.
So for entertainment overload, the reason why I created this episode is because this has been like a very this is like a topic that I really care about.
Yeah.
I think that through this process of this ego death that I experienced, I realized that like life matters outside of all these distractions. And I would say I was more present after that. And that was like one of the biggest things that changed is that
Mm,
instead of just being in my head all the time and thinking, I
yeah.
was viewing things and taking them in as they were.
Yeah.
And so I remember there was this moment where I was just sitting on the couch and with my family, and we had the TV going on.
Mm,
And instead of watching the TV, I was looking at the room with all of us watching the TV. And
yeah.
it became like this weird like way of viewing it where the
Huh.
TV wasn't as like it wasn't as like the main focus, but
Yeah.
it was something outside of what the real focus was.
Yeah.
And so over time, I started like paying attention to these changes that happened over the last couple decades with like
Mm,
social media, movies, like just entertainment in general.
yeah.
And so what I would say is that we're at this point now. There are so many distractions um, everywhere around us. We have phones in our pockets that are little computers that sometimes are even faster than some computers most
Yeah,
people
dude.
have. We have
Mm,
multiple different streaming services where some people are paying monthly to multiple streamings to have hundreds of to thousands of different TV shows. We have music that we can access in an instant of just opening up our
I
phone.
love my Spotify.
Yeah, dude. We even have social media, which is a weird process within its own.
Yeah.
And all these things around us, I started realizing that a lot of people that I saw were always distracting themselves with something no matter what.
Mm,
And it got to the point where I started noticing that I was doing that myself, where I'd sit down on the couch after I'd get home from work and I'd find something to do no matter what. Like go in autopilot mode where
yeah.
either I'd turn the TV on, play a video game, open my phone and do something on that. But for some reason I could never just be present and pay attention to what's going on around me.
Yeah. And then you like look up from your phone and you're like, dude, it's an hour and a half. I've been sitting here, been scrolling,
Yeah.
looking at nothing. And then you can think back like, what was I looking at 30 minutes ago? No idea. You missed out. And your kids are sitting there. You know, you could spend time with your kids. You could spend time with your wife. I feel you, dude. I was in the church. We call it conviction. I was feeling
Conviction?
convicted,
Okay.
dude. I was like, man, I'm hearing that and going, oh, that's me. So many times, like that's me. I do that. I want to just get lost in that and forget completely. There's a whole life outside of it. Yeah, whole life outside of it. So, sorry, I
Yeah.
cut you off, but I heard it, I'm like, yep,
No,
yep, yep,
man.
yep. I get you.
Yeah, it's crazy though, but I wouldn't blame yourself if you
Mm,
ever worried about that because
yeah.
we live in a world now where everyone wants to make money off of the individual. They want us to be consumers
Totally.
because like entertainment industry is like the biggest out of every other industry
Yeah.
because they're making so much money,
Oh yeah.
billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it's not our faults that we want to be this way because
Mm.
everything is pushing this towards us all the time. We have advertisements everywhere we go. I
Uh-huh.
mean, if you live in like New York City, that's the whole entire town is
Yeah, dude.
advertisements. You go in your room and your bed is an advertisement.
Yeah.
You know.
And you bring up a interesting point in your podcast. You talk about how everything's so stimulating now compared to, I mean, I look back to when we were even kids and think, dude, there's nothing even close to just the things that we would. I'll give you an example, and I'm just throwing it
Okay.
back here. I was going back and watching some Balloon Shop on YouTube, dude.
I love Balloon
Some
Shop.
Balloon Shop. It was so good. I was watching and I was like, man, this is hilarious. And then I looked at it and I thought, I want to turn this off in like 30 seconds. Like now. Now I'd look at it and be like, this is trash. And I would have missed out on, you know, all of the wonderfulness that is Balloon Shop. So I say that to say, look at the content that we have now is so wildly
I'd say stimulating was a good word for
stimulating,
that.
I guess the good word. Yeah, stimulating just compared to what we've had in the past. So you talk a little bit about that. You talk about even just the budgets that these companies like Netflix and like Hulu have for their own original content. Stuff that used to be, a little bit maybe low budget or that was kind of just a little bit piecemeal is now like millions of dollars, like movie studio money being put into these shows. So can you talk a little bit about you mentioned this idea of filler entertainment And I don't know if that's a concept that's from somewhere else or if that's a wonderful idea from Lane's mind. You're like, I don't know, maybe it is. But this idea of filler entertainment. So what does that look like? What I guess how do you see filler entertainment fitting into your life, and what do you do with it?
Okay. Yeah, so I don't remember where that term came from. I could have came up from it, but I could be wrong. I
Yeah.
honestly don't know.
Yeah.
But what I describe that as is that like there's so much content out there,
Mm.
and the budgets are so high for these not even for just movies or TV shows, but for video games,
Yeah. Yeah.
for even like I would say even like social media in some ways, or like YouTube. But sometimes these things, like for instance, like let's say the Transformers movies, they're guilty pleasure movies or just entertainment values.
But
And
Shia
so
though.
yeah, I mean the first one was good, but the rest, man.
But Shia though. Yeah. Yeah. No, I get you. I get you.
Yeah. I'd say we've come to this point where it's like I think there's like this idea that there needs to be like a re-evolution of what we categorize things as good content,
Mm.
because 20 years ago, everything we have now we would categorize as beyond amazing. Like
Yeah.
it would
Totally.
literally blow our minds to know these things even exist
Yeah.
nowadays. But now we
Mm.
have so many of these that are out there that are wanting us to watch them,
Mm.
or people pushing us to watch them, that I believe that we need to look and find the next step of evolution within entertainment, and what
Yeah.
things stand out of the crowds.
Yeah.
And I've kind of went through this process of my own of going, okay, all these shows, like there's a bunch of shows where I would just watch after work, and like just continuously, like The Office,
Yeah.
for instance,
Yeah.
which I think is a great show.
Yeah. Great show.
But
Yeah.
there's so much of like an endless loop of content that I started just choosing things that stood out to me that seemed to be more impactful. Like for instance, like some of these movies that are created by like production companies that are actually trying new things,
Yeah.
versus just watching something that's like carbon copied and created
Yeah.
times, like Marvel movies, for
Like
instance, or
or
Star
like
Wars.
every Marvel TV series ever that you're like, I
Yeah.
kind of know what I'm gonna get. Like you
Yeah.
kind of have a little bit of an idea what you're gonna get with it. Yeah. Man.
Yeah, there's nothing really special about them.
No.
Like what they are is just like, I would say it's making money off nostalgia. Like there's these characters that
Mm.
are interesting,
No.
but forever. It's like playing Skyrim for like the rest of your life. Like there's these auto quests that can happen. Like they literally
Uh-huh.
built in AI where there's random quests that happen forever. You
Mhm.
can literally play that game forever and have these quests. But
It's so
now
crazy.
there's TV shows where they're literally just taking the idea and who these characters are, and then just putting them through random shit. It's the same reason why
Yeah.
Supernatural's running still, like after like 14 seasons.
Yeah, dude.
Like if there's like people that are gonna watch it, they're not gonna care. They're just gonna keep creating content, even if it's
because
not that
they
great.
get that money, and because people are gonna keep watching it because they're stuck in that loop. And I want to get into this idea you mentioned of being a consumer versus a creator, and how that is kind of maybe a solution to this idea of entertainment overload. But I wanted to zero in on something that I thought was really interesting, because lots of podcasts I've listened to have talked about this concept. And being here in Louisiana right now, where Mardi Gras is happening and where we're getting ready to go into Lent, you mentioned this idea of fasting and meditation. And so knowing, I guess, your space where you're coming from right now, where you wouldn't say, I don't know if you would say you're not coming from a religious standpoint with fasting and meditation. You're talking about, I guess, the benefits of those just personally. Can you speak a little bit into I guess how fasting, how meditation, those two fit into this solving the problem of entertainment overload, and what you're doing for those?
Sure, yeah. So after like I had my ego death experience, one of the things I heard people talk about was meditation.
Yeah.
And I always had thought that this is like for people that are like super religious. I didn't understand like what
Yeah.
would be the point of something like this.
Yeah.
And so I started practicing it. And what I realized the whole process of meditation is letting go of the ego. It's relaxing and turning off the noise in your head
Yeah.
to let go and kind of become your present and natural self.
Mm.
And so I'd say how this fits in is that if um, meditation kind of shows you that everything around you, entertainment wise, is just stuff to put more noise in your head,
Yeah.
and they don't really even matter to begin with.
Yeah.
If you come back to the idea that just being present and living life with what's going on around you versus distracting yourself with something,
No.
none of that really matters.
Yeah.
And so I practice meditation, and that's also one of the things that kind of helped me get out of my addiction to some of these entertainments that I'd use.
Yeah.
And I will say this, I don't think all entertainment's bad, but I think you have to kind of use it as a more of a benefit versus like living your life through it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people live their lives through it.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that the only thing they talk about is literally what they were watching the day before. And that's their conversation.
Yeah, and
That's literally becomes who they are.
Oh, it's so exhausting. And then what it does is it fills the space where you could have conversations like this, where you and I are talking about, ego death, a concept that, not very many people are talking about at this time, at least in like just mainstream life, because they're too busy talking about, is Friends going to get a reboot? Or things like that. Oh man. Well, so what about fasting? Because I heard fasting, and then of course my pastor ears shot up because I'm like, oh, cool. Like this is concept in the Bible, also a concept in just I don't know. I'm not sure how old the concept is. I'm sure it's in a very old concept, very 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 old concept. But what does that look like for you, and how does I guess that impact your entertainment overload?
Yeah. So I would say even eating food is entertainment.
Yeah.
It's using something to kind of like fill a void that you have.
Yep.
And so I started also doing fasting because I wouldn't say I started doing fasting, but after meditating and kind of being present, I realized I didn't need food.
Yeah.
Or I didn't really need anything.
Interesting.
And so after I started like doing fasting stuff, I started realizing how much better I felt while fasting. I didn't notice that consuming sugar or a lot of caffeine or even like I would even could say like smoking like cigarettes or like nicotine, like all these things were affecting me and causing like more anxiety in my thoughts. Totally. And so I started doing fasting because I noticed it put me in a position where it was easier to let go of my thoughts and my ego and just like let go of myself.
Yeah. So there's this biblical concept. I'm not sure exactly where I think it's Paul that talks about it. I'm showing how much I'm not up on it. But this idea that he talks about where everything's permissible for me, but not everything's beneficial. Everything's permissible, but I will not be mastered by anything. It's the whole concept of it's okay to do these things. Like technically it's okay, but is it beneficial to you as a person, moving forward? I think that's kind of, maybe that's not exactly the heart of what that passage is trying to get at, but I think that concept rings true in this situation where you're sitting there going, like, I could smoke a cigarette, or I could, have that one extra beer, or I could, sit and binge watch The Office for the next 4 hours, but is it beneficial? And I think you've kind of zeroed in on that question of like, is this beneficial for me? Like, is this helping change my life? So one of the things I'm doing, I wanted to mention to you, I'm kind of excited about it. I need you to hold me accountable if you see it. For Lent, and I've never practiced Lent. I guess it's more of a Catholic thing than anything else.
What is that, if you don't mind me asking?
Lent is okay, I'm going to mess it up now that you asked me, because I think it's a Catholic celebration. Or not celebration. It's a Catholic fasting from a specific item, specific thing for 40 days. And it's supposed to symbolize the 40 days that Jesus went in the wilderness, but when he was being tempted by the devil. I want to say that's what it is. I might be wrong. I'm probably going to mess it up. But it's 40 days. And so I think it basically it's leading up to Easter.
Okay. I think I actually have heard that before.
I think that's right.
Sacrifice kind of.
Yeah, but it's a lot of people just for Lent and when they observe Lent, they give up a specific thing for a time. Now, for me, I'm not doing it for like the practice of Lent. It's more just kind of a like getting in the habit of fasting a thing. So I'm fasting my phone. I'm fasting social media. My mom has been talking about how she was going to do it. And I said, I'll do it with you, Mom. Sure, why not? So for 40 days, I'm going to fast social media. And you put a similar call out in your second episode where you talked about it. Don't touch your phone for a week, or don't play Spotify for a week. See how it impacts and changes, and how much more vibrant those things are when they come back, because you're out of that loop. You're out of that overload to where you understand, like, whoa, this is really, really cool. And if it's done well, and if I'm not overloaded with it, it can be a really cool tool as opposed to something that enslaves you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We become like desensitized to all these things because we're using them so constantly.
And because there's so much money being thrown into content, and so we're looping back around at the beginning. So tell me a little bit about this. You kind of see entertainment overload like a solution to that being the idea of being a consumer or being a creator. And you talked about this idea of, do you want to just be someone that consumes, that's more like zombie-like in how you act, or a creator, like someone that uses this tech to your advantage, uses this social media to your advantage to I guess change your outlook on it. So what does that look like to you? What are you talking about with that?
Yeah, and so that's a great thing to bring up. So this idea of like being a consumer or creator, consumerism is really interesting because, like we mentioned, it's kind of like being enslaved by these things.
Yeah, totally.
And you hear all these people are like calling everyone sheep and like sheeple, whatever. Like it's so cheesy to say, but like
from their iPhones.
Yeah. But in reality, like people are literally just following what's given to them, and that's when it becomes really weird, where it's literally like a carrot on the end of like a stick in front of you all the time. Like you finish the last show and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna be done with Netflix for a while after this show, and then they add something else like that week, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna watch that. Well, guess what? That can become this endless loop of not doing anything other than just consuming this content.
Yeah, totally.
But everything has become that way, where I'd say there's like this entertainment like cycle that I've mentioned in my podcast episode, the second one, where people like fill their entire day with cycling through these entertainments all the time, where like you wake up, look at your phone, get on social media while you're eating breakfast, on the way to work listening to music, or hopefully a podcast, because I'd say that's more beneficial. But
the Conscious Mess podcast, that's what you're listening to.
Yeah, whatever.
That's what you're listening to. Yep.
So like filling up their entire day with always doing something, and that's literally the idea of what consumerism is just consuming what people are giving.
Yeah.
And so if you're filling your entire day and utilizing what other people are creating, you're not doing anything other than being consumer. But so then I bring up this idea of trying to be on the outside, kind of like trying to join what the outside is doing, where they're the ones creating the content.
Yeah.
And by doing this, there's a lot more benefits that I believe exist when you start creating. You're more creative. You feel productive. I know if I watch and become like too much of a consumer over like a weekend of like watching too many shows or eating a lot of food, I feel like kind of like sick and demotivated because I feel like I didn't get anything done.
Yeah.
And so I'd say like there's this side where you kind of want to be like your own person. You don't want to be what everyone wants you to be, or like what everything's making you be. Yeah. Because if you're filling your life up with all this entertainment, your life is literally just going to become whatever you're consuming. People don't realize this, but literally your brain picks up on everything you're looking at, reading, listening to, and that's going to become who you are over time.
Yeah, it's gonna shift. It's gonna impact. It's gonna change your. I mean, there are times where my wife will watch a show, and I don't know if you experience this with your wife. There are times where she's watching a show, and she'll just walk into the room, and just the way she's talking, I'm like, what were you watching? Because like I can tell there's something in it that just shifted and totally changed your mood, your personality. I mean, there was one specific show that I know many people, I think is it Black Mirror? There's so many people like had to just stop because it messed up, and it changed, like it was changing their life because it was something that was impacting them so heavily. I wanted to point this out because it's something that I had my phone pulled up because I wanted to look at it. When you're talking about the idea of this cycle we go in of pick it up in the morning, check and see what's going on Facebook, and then, maybe as you're brushing your teeth, you're watching YouTube video or listening to a podcast or whatever. I was looking at my screen time app on my phone the other day, and my average is 139 times a day I pick my phone up off the table and put it back down.
Wow.
And I'm looking at it going, dude, that's not the way I want to live. Like, I don't want to, like, what am I doing what's so important that I have to take 139 times out of my day, pick my phone up and open up Facebook to look at it and see what's going on with the feed, see what other people are doing. So I'm really stoked to go through, this going through, I guess, practicing Lent and just fasting, getting away from social media, because for me that's public relations major in college, and I love journalism, public relations. So to social media is something that's always stuck to me. I love it. I've tried to minimize the amount of time that I'm at least posting on it as well, feeling like I don't have to have my voice out there all the time, because people aren't going to care all the time. So
Yeah, but you kind of use it differently. I've noticed over the years, being your friend, that you use it in a manner of being very positive for people and using it to support your friends, which I think is amazing.
Oh, dude, I love it. I love supporting, because being in bands, I mean, you and I were in a band back in Boise. I had to bring it up, dude. Trebuchet for life.
Yeah.
Trebuchet for life. But being in bands, growing up forever in bands and playing in them, I'm like, I want to be able to support people if they have something cool they're doing. And I think if I were to think back to it, maybe it goes towards that. Maybe in the back of my mind, it goes towards that consumer versus creator idea, where I know how much I get jacked whenever I'm creating. And I know, even just sitting and doing this podcast, I've been pumped up about it, going through and just talking, because I'm like, this is something creative, this is something different. I'm not just sitting and playing, a game on my computer or messing around scrolling on my phone. It's something I get to produce from here and put it out there. So I love supporting people, man. I saw your podcast come across. I was like, yes, let's go.
Yeah, dude, I really appreciate that. It motivated me a lot.
I love
keep
it,
this
dude.
Going.
I love it.
But
yeah.
There are a lot of people who don't use social media for that reason.
Yeah.
There's some people who literally just use it just to post pictures of themselves to gain gratification from others all the time.
Yeah, and it's crazy. It's crazy how toxic it can get so quickly. Just the amount of information we receive about people's lives, and it's so easy to compare so quickly and go, oh man, I can't believe they did that with their kid. For me, I think they did that with their kids. Man, I should step up my game with my kids. Which, maybe it's not a bad thing, but if that's all you see and it changes your entire outlook of your entire day, maybe it's time to put it down, step into something else.
I'd say it depends on what you're looking at, though. I mean, that's the variable that changes all the time. If you're looking at and seeing cool parents do things, and you're like, you know what, that's really smart. I'm gonna try that at home. That's different than you see a bunch of especially my wife or a lot of women I know who just look at makeup of people that are so clearly photoshopped in these photos and making comparisons to themselves that they want to be that. Yeah. That's not a productive thing to make a comparison to at all, compared to looking at and how you can increase the fun in your family or something.
Yeah,
that's a big difference.
It's hard. I'm really glad that I don't wear makeup and that I don't have to deal with makeup at all.
Well, you're beautiful enough. You don't need makeup.
Well, thank you, man.
Okay. One thing you mentioned earlier when you were talking about you being in bands and kind of seeing that and wanting to support people. Yeah. That's one of the things that I've kind of learned from this Ego Death experience was this. I would say it's an overview look. Instead of living through these things, of looking at the overview of what's going on. So kind of what I mentioned earlier of instead of watching TV with my family, looking at what's kind of going on of us watching TV.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is one of the things I kind of learned, and I'd call a conscious overview. I'm people being consciously aware of things versus just living through them.
Yeah.
And or it's the idea of being meta, where it's so ironic because you're looking at everything versus just the specific parts.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's exactly what you were doing is that you were in a band, you were around other bands, and you understood them enough that you knew what they needed that would benefit them in a positive way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. and knowing just to how excited I got and how much it boosted. I mean, you're even talking about me supporting you with your podcast and how much it encouraged you. Where you're like, man, I wanna keep going with this. For me, knowing that there's something that creativity does to the soul. For me, I would attribute it to saying, in my belief system, I would say God is creative in himself. And so when we're creative, it seems like that's something that would make sense as to why it would excite us so much. It would bring us up. I don't know how much,
Yeah, sure.
I don't know, for me, I don't know how much consuming God's doing of our content. I think he might be caring a little bit more about creativity. And so for me, I think through that way, like creativity is something that I guess, it's kind of, it's something that is in our nature, something that clicks when you have that creativity, that option, something that just sparks and you can go and it pushes you forward into, outside of your normal life, outside of just the day to day that we get stuck in so easy. So I saw that. I know how it impacts me. So I'm like, let's go. I want to encourage these people. I know how much it'll change them. I know how much it'll help them because it helps me.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like having empathy. And I think this is one of the interesting parts is like, in that same way of like consciously looking at things, you could like, for instance, you could see someone like in high school where like someone's like a bully and they're picking on people. One person could just see him for what they're doing and go, this guy's like an asshole. Why is he being this way?
Yeah.
Or someone could look at it from an overview and have more empathy and go, this guy, he probably had issues at home that led him to be this way. Like these things that caused him to become this way. It's not really just him being this way. There's some pain there that's causing him to be this way.
For sure. Well, knowing that each of us have a human condition. Oh, human condition. Each of us have a human condition that, when there's hurt and when there is pain that people are going through, people are going to respond in different ways. Some people are going to get depressed. I think I would lean that way. Seems like that's probably where you would lean towards depression. Some people interact with hurt and pain as just lashing out. So that bully, they very well could just need somebody to want to love them, want to interact with them in a way that's just, hey, I see you as a person, not just as this attitude that you have.
Yeah, you're looking at them as like you're looking at them as a being versus just like an identity of who they are.
Yeah. Which is crazy because it shifts everything. If that's how you think about people, yeah.
Well, that's one of the crazy parts about like judging, and that's something I had to work on because I didn't realize how much I judged people.
Yeah.
And but the idea of judging is literally just taking like a snapshot of who they are currently and only looking at them as being that person versus looking at them and everything else that's led to them being that way, or even new changes that they've adapted to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can still think I can still hear my mom in the back of my head whenever I would get mad about something as a kid. And I'm really glad like she ingrained this in me because I think about it often. She ingrained in me of like, if someone's mad or someone says something to you that you're just like, what is this person's like? Why are they being so mean? You don't know what their day was like. You have no idea what events led them to that. You don't know. I mean, what could have happened to them. They could have suffered some abuse and some trauma that I would never have the capacity to understand, And then I think we have, an option. We can either choose to say we're just going to live in this same system where we're in, our overload of just life as it is day to day, or we can choose to say, I think there may be something different. I want to kind of lean into what that different is as opposed to just going by as we normally do day to day.
Yeah. I think that's really awesome. I think you're very lucky to have a mother who pushed that type of idea on you.
Yeah.
That's like a crazy thing because like just general morality around just being empathetic is such a powerful thing, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that's very much needed to be taught nowadays. We see a lot of people where it's like everything's so cutthroat and tribalistic where it's just if you upset me, I'm not even gonna think about the reason why. I'm just gonna hate you for the fact that you upset me.
I love it. And you know what? And I wasn't gonna go into it, but I'm gonna go into it now because I feel like we're kind of at a place. That's why I wanted to have you for my first podcast because I think you and I think differently on things. I think we hold different views on things. But as well as I do, tribalism has no place in this relationship with you and I. You know, I love you. I love having conversations with you. We shared many good conversations, close conversations just in the past about life and about our kids. You know, and even when we can come into a situation like this where, you know, you're talking about this experience you had, and, you know, for me, I haven't experienced it, and, you know, I'm still thinking, like, what does this mean to me? How do I think through it? There are going to be some people that are going to hear this podcast, or maybe even just see the title and think, wow, I can't believe that James would associate with that person. And I just think, dude, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that person that's just so head in the sand that they don't realize that we're just people. Everyone's figuring something out. You know, I believe the answer is Jesus. I think other people are going to have different beliefs, and I can't just shut people out because they have a different belief or because they have a different mindset. If anything, I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to learn about it. I want to see, man, how does this impact and change my life? You know, what's it going to do when I'm sitting at home on my couch the next time watching a show with my kids? Am I going to be focused on Paw Patrol for the 1500th time watching through Mighty Pups? No, I'm not. I'm going to be focused on that moment because I'm going to think back to the conversation we had. So, man, I appreciate the conversation. You know I love you. I appreciate you coming in, giving me a chance to sit and take up some of your time. If you would, tell like all 2 listeners that are going to watch this and listen to it, tell them where they can find you, and you'll be in the show notes. And tell them a little bit about, I guess if you want to, some things you got coming up with Conscious Mess.
Yeah, sure. So one thing I wanted to add on to what you said last before that is you are a very open-minded person, which is awesome. I think that's the one thing that's kind of growing right now, and I think it's really amazing, is like this idea of being open-minded, where you don't have to believe what someone else's beliefs are, but you can be open-minded enough to have a discussion with them.
Totally. Yeah. Because why would I want to? My thing I've always said is this: if what I believe is true, why am I going to be scared that something else is going to come and they're going to change that truth? You know, if I believe that this is absolute truth, that Jesus is real, why would I be scared to have a conversation with somebody about it that's, you know, something different, or, you know, whatever my beliefs may be, whatever that situation is. So, you know, I don't know.
Usually it's a fear response.
Yeah.
They just want to, they don't know how to react other than just being fearful. And they just want to put up a defensive front just to get out of it. Yeah,
totally. Well, and that's my thing is I want to seek truth. I want to seek honest conversations. This podcast I'm excited about, just seeking honest conversations with people that are, you know, working through. I don't think any of us would ever say we haven't figured out, because I think the moment you say you haven't figured out is the moment that you're starting back.
That's when the ego slips in.
That's right, dude. That's right.
Yeah. But, to go back to my podcast, you can find me on YouTube and Facebook at Conscious Mess with an M. Get it? It's a little tricky there. It's not consciousness. It's Conscious Mess.
I love it.
Took me like 5 minutes to get that.
I love it.
Yeah. So I'm kind of like been adapting it. I have like 3 episodes released so far where I'm just talking about like some of my beliefs and ideas that I've come up with.
Yeah.
But one thing that's kind of changed in the direction where I'm wanting to go is I'm starting to realize that there's a lot of YouTubers that are randomly out of nowhere with their huge followings talking about their psychedelic experiences that have changed their life.
Yes.
Like talking it in the same manner that I've changed my life.
Yeah.
And so my plan is to start interviewing YouTubers and hearing their experiences and stories with this, because if they feel like it's that big of a thing that changed their lives and they're talking about it, even though they're willing to give like their 100,000 followers like ammo to leave them, then that's a huge deal to them. So
because that's their livelihood.
Yeah. And so that's my plan, is to start. I found a way to contact a lot of YouTubers, and
man.
I just interviewed one named Tripwhip, who I'm going to be releasing his episode here probably this week.
Nice.
He's just like a person who's just really into psychedelics, but so yeah, that's going to the future of the podcast is going to be interviewing a lot of interesting YouTubers and hearing their experiences. So,
yeah. Dude,
if you want to follow me on those, it'd be awesome. And any support, seriously, appreciated.
Awesome. That's great, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on, for talking. I appreciate it. I think it's some good conversation. I didn't know how long it was going to last. And so we're rolling up on an hour now. So thank you for your time. And we'll have to, I'll definitely have to have you back on. I'll be listening to Conscious Mess and start hearing more stuff. I imagine if this podcast continues for me, if it's something that grows, gets a little bit of traction, and it's something I end up sticking with doing, then I'm definitely going to have you on. Just talk through, because I think you have a very interesting perspective. I think you have an engaging perspective too, so stick with it. I love it. Stick with it, my friend.
Thanks, James. I really appreciate that, man.
Yeah, buddy. I love you, man. I'll see you next time.
All right. Love you too, dude.
See you. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to That Dang Millennial, y'all. My name is James. I really enjoyed my time with you today. If you would, follow us on our socials. We're on Instagram and on Facebook at That Dang Millennial. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, you can also see a video version of this on our YouTube. And YouTubers, hey, right back to you. If you want to listen to us on audio, if you just get tired of seeing my face, you can go and just listen to my sweet, sultry voice on Apple Podcasts. So be sure to like, be sure to subscribe, all of those pages. You know where to find us. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.